Welcome to the HFY Codex Tale. If you like our videos, keep supporting and subscribe to our channel. The Nexus 7 detention facility hung like a dark jewel against the rust-colored storms of Helios Prime, its obsidian towers piercing the perpetual clouds. Within its walls, Colonel Marcus Drake stood at parade rest, watching the proceedings below with carefully concealed disgust. The execution chamber, euphemistically called the Judgment Arena, stretched beneath the observation deck like a massive throat. "The accused stands charged with espionage against the hegemony," announced Magistrate Reeves, his amplified voice echoing through the chamber. "Sentence to be carried out immediately." Drake studied the prisoner. She was Thanari, immediately recognizable by her iridescent skin and the delicate fin-like structures that framed her face. Unlike the stories of their warriors, she appeared small, almost fragile. Her name was Nira, according to the datapad he'd reviewed that morning, and she was listed as a healer from one of their outer colonies. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality even in protest. "I was treating refugees, nothing more." The magistrate didn't even acknowledge her words. Drake had seen enough of these proceedings to know how they ended. The hegemony had been looking for excuses to crack down on the Thanari for months, ever since they'd refused to share their biological engineering secrets. The chamber floor split open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the infamous Ravager pit. Even from his elevated position, Drake could hear the chittering of the Mordrix below, bioengineered predators combining the worst traits of arachnids and reptiles. They were living weapons, and Drake had seen firsthand what they could do during the border wars. "Colonel Drake," a smooth voice interrupted his thoughts. Commander Victoria Sterling appeared at his side, her pristine white uniform a stark contrast to the darkness of the chamber. "I'm pleased you could attend. It's important for our military liaison to witness how we handle threats to security." Drake nodded stiffly. "Of course, Commander." He'd spent 15 years in special operations before this posting, and something about this situation felt wrong. The intelligence file on Nira was too thin, the evidence circumstantial at best. Below, the guards moved to position Nira at the pit's edge. She didn't struggle, but her eyes darted between the shadows moving in the depths and the observation deck above. For a moment, her gaze seemed to meet Drake's, and he felt a strange resonance, like a chord struck deep in his mind. "Proceed," Sterling commanded. The guards pushed Nira forward. She fell gracefully, her simple white garment billowing around her like wings. Drake's hands tightened behind his back, expecting the usual horrible sounds to follow. But something different happened. Nira's voice rose from the pit, not in a scream, but in song. The sound was unlike anything Drake had ever heard, complex harmonies that seemed to weave through the air like visible threads of light. The chittering below changed pitch, became something almost musical itself. Sterling stepped forward sharply. "What's happening, guards?" Drake moved before his conscious mind caught up with his instincts. His hand found the emergency release for the maintenance ladder, and he was moving down the chamber's wall while alarms began to blare. He heard Sterling shouting orders, but the sound was drowned out by Nira's song and the strange answering calls from the Mordrix. He reached the pit's edge and saw her standing in a circle of the creatures. They swayed like cobras, their usual aggressive posture transformed into something almost reverent. Nira's song continued, but her eyes found his, and he saw equal parts fear and determination there. "Take my hand," Drake said, extending his arm. "Quickly." She reached for him just as the first stun blasts from the guards above began to pepper the ground around them. The Mordrix scattered, their peaceful spell broken. Drake pulled Nira up and immediately moved them both behind a support pillar as more fire rained down. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Drake checked his sidearm, knowing he had seconds to make a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Because that song of yours wasn't the sound of a spy, and because I've seen enough innocent blood spilled to last several lifetimes." Over the alarms, he could hear Sterling organizing search parties. They would have to move fast and smart to have any chance of escape. But looking at Nira, at the way she carried herself even in crisis, at the power he'd just witnessed, Drake knew he'd made the right choice. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind that access panel," he said, gesturing to a barely visible seam in the wall. "If we can reach it, we might have a chance. Do you trust me?" Nira studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You risked everything to save me. Trust seems a small thing to offer in return." Drake allowed himself a grim smile. Then let's move, and perhaps along the way you can tell me the real story of why the hegemony wants you dead. They moved through the shadows of the chamber, the sound of boots and orders growing closer. Above them, Sterling's voice promised swift retribution for this betrayal. But Drake focused only on their next step, their next breath, and the growing certainty that he'd just stumbled into something far bigger than a simple execution. The truth, he suspected, would prove to be both beautiful and terrible, just like the song that had started it all. The maintenance tunnels of Nexus 7 were a maze of pipes and shadows, filled with the constant hum of machinery. Colonel Drake led Nira through the narrow passages, his military training keeping them one step ahead of the search parties. Every few minutes, the facility's AI would announce another security checkpoint activation, slowly tightening the net around them. "They're sealing off sections," Drake muttered, checking his datapad's map. "We need to find a way to the research level. It's our best chance of accessing a communications terminal." Nira moved silently beside him, her iridescent skin dimmed to match the darkness around them. "You still haven't asked me," she said softly. "About the Mordrix?" Drake kept his eyes on the path ahead. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Right now, staying alive seems more important than satisfying my curiosity." A distant clang of boots on metal made them both freeze. Drake pulled them into an alcove, pressing close to the warm pipes as a patrol passed on the level above them. When the sound faded, Nira spoke again. "My people weren't always healers," she said. "Long ago we were guardians, keepers of balance. The Mordrix were created as weapons, but we found a way to communicate with them, to soothe their engineered rage. Through song, through resonance, everything has a frequency, even anger, even pain. Find the right harmony and you can transform it." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden burst of static from Drake's communicator. He'd kept it on, hopping to monitor the search parties, but this was different. A woman's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Colonel Drake, this is Dr. Samira Hassan from the Research Division. If you can hear this, I'm broadcasting on a secured channel. I want to help." Drake exchanged a look with Nira before responding. "This could be a trap." "It could be," the voice agreed. "But I know why they really arrested Nira. I've been studying the Mordrix project for 3 years. What Commander Sterling is planning. It's wrong. I can get you to a shuttle, but you'll have to trust me." Before Drake could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Sterling's voice filled every corridor. "Attention all personnel. Colonel Drake and the prisoner have been spotted in Section 7. Security teams converge. They are to be taken alive if possible, if not." "We're running out of options," Nira said. Drake made his decision. "Dr. Hassan, we're in the maintenance tunnels below research. How do we reach you?" "There's a vertical access shaft 20 meters ahead on your left. I can override the security locks, but you'll have to climb. Hurry." They found the shaft where she described. Drake used his security clearance to open the access panel, revealing a maintenance ladder stretching up into darkness. As if on cue, they heard boots approaching from both directions in the tunnel. "Ladies first," Drake said, covering their rear with his sidearm. Nira began climbing swiftly. Drake followed, pulling the access panel closed behind them just as lights swept the tunnel below. They climbed in near-total darkness, guided only by dim emergency strips every few meters. 6 levels, Dr. Hassan's voice crackled through the communicator. "I'm monitoring the security feeds. They haven't figured out where you've gone yet, but wait." Her voice became urgent. "They're activating the containment protocols. The shaft's atmospheric seals are cycling." Drake heard it then, the whine of machinery spinning up. "How long?" 30 seconds before this section decompresses. Hurry." They climbed faster, muscles burning. Drake could feel the air beginning to thin, his lungs working harder with each breath. Above him, Nira's movements became less coordinated. "There," she pointed to a maintenance hatch marked R&D Level 3. "Hassan, we need that door open now." The hatch clicked and swung open just as the first real effects of decompression hit them. They pulled themselves through, collapsing onto the sterile white floor of a research corridor as the hatch sealed automatically behind them. A woman in a lab coat rushed to help them up. Dr. Hassan, Drake presumed. She was younger than he expected, with worried eyes and quick movements. "Are you all right? I'm sorry I couldn't override the containment protocols without alerting security." "We're fine," Drake said, helping Nira to her feet. "But we need to move. Where's this shuttle you mentioned?" "In the private bay reserved for research staff," Hassan said, leading them down the corridor. "But first, there's something you need to see. Evidence of what Sterling is really doing with the Mordric program, why she's so desperate to capture Nira." They followed her into a research lab. One wall was lined with stasis tanks containing Mordric specimens in various stages of modification. Nira approached them slowly, her expression a mixture of horror and sadness. "They're trying to remove the parts of their genetic code that make them susceptible to our resonance," she said, "making them immune to our abilities. But why?" Dr. Hassan activated a holographic display. "Because Sterling isn't just running a prison, she's building an army, and your people are the only thing standing in her way." The display showed military deployment plans, genetic research files, and something that made Drake's blood run cold: a list of other Thanari healers who had recently disappeared across the galaxy. "Nira wasn't arrested for spying," Hassan said grimly. "She was taken because she's part of a pattern. Sterling is systematically eliminating anyone who might be able to control these weapons she's creating, and if she succeeds." "War," Drake finished, "on a scale we haven't seen in generations." A security alert flashed on Hassan's console. "They're sweeping this level. We need to go. The shuttle bay is 3 sections over." As they moved to leave, Nira paused by the stasis tanks. She placed one hand against the glass, and for a moment, Drake thought he could hear a faint melody, sad and ancient and full of promise. "We'll stop this," he told her, "whatever it takes." She nodded, and they followed Hassan into the corridor, leaving behind the grotesque evidence of Sterling's ambitions. But Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time, not just for themselves, but for peace itself. The abandoned hydroponics level of Nexus 7 was a graveyard of failed experiments. Withered vines hung from broken growth lattices, and the air carried the musty scent of decay. Dr. Hassan led them through the shadowy chambers, past rows of empty nutrient tanks that glowed faintly with residual bioluminescent algae. "Security never comes down here," she explained, pushing aside a curtain of dead vegetation. "The atmospheric processors failed years ago. They declared the whole level contaminated." Drake helped Nira over a fallen support beam, keeping his sidearm ready. Their escape attempt had been cut short when Sterling's forces had locked down the shuttle bay. Now they were playing a dangerous waiting game, hiding in the facility's forgotten spaces while trying to figure out their next move. "Tell me about the others," Nira said to Hassan. "The missing healers, what happened to them?" Hassan's face darkened as she led them into what had once been a climate control station. Screens covered in years of dust flickered to life under her touch. "Sterling's been methodical. Each disappearance was made to look like something else. Criminal charges, accidents, some simply vanished, but they all ended up in black sites like this one." The screens displayed facility after facility, each a variation on Nexus 7's design. Drake studied the locations, his military experience filling in the gaps. "These are all in disputed territories, places where jurisdiction is unclear and oversight is minimal." "Exactly," Hassan confirmed. "Sterling's building her program in the shadows, using the prison system as cover, but it's more than just removing potential threats to her weapon program. She's harvesting them." Nira went very still. "What do you mean?" Hassan pulled up classified research files. "Sterling's scientists discovered that while they couldn't replicate your people's ability to influence the Mordrics, they could extract certain compounds from Thanari neural tissue. Chemicals that, when processed correctly, can temporarily suppress the creature's aggressive tendencies." "They're killing my people to control their weapons," Nira whispered, her iridescent skin paling to an ashen gray. Drake's jaw tightened. "How many?" 17 confirmed so far, but there are dozens more marked for acquisition. Sterling's planning something big. The scale of Mordric production has tripled in the last month alone." A distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. Drake moved to the door, checking the corridor. "Speaking of production, what's happening in the lower levels? That's the third tremor I've felt since we came down here." Hassan's expression grew troubled. "They're expanding the breeding chambers. The original Mordrics were created in small batches, carefully controlled, but Sterling's ordered mass production. Thousands of them, growing in accelerated development tanks. The power requirements are straining the facility's infrastructure." It's wrong, Nira said, studying the genetic data on the screens. The resonance doesn't work that way. Forced growth, artificial control, it creates dissonance, instability. She turned to Hassan. Show me the breeding chamber schematics. The doctor brought up the facility plans. Nira traced the massive circular chambers with a slender finger. These aren't just breeding tanks. They're amplification chambers. The architecture, the power flows, they're designed to enhance and direct psychic resonance. Like a weapon, Drake realized. Using your people's own abilities against them, but corrupted, weaponized. Another tremor, stronger this time, made the screens flicker. Hassan checked her datapad. Power fluctuations are increasing. The containment systems are already at their limits, if Sterling keeps pushing production at this rate. The dissonance will build until it breaks, Nira finished. And when it does, every Mordric in the facility will go into killing frenzy. No control, no restraint. Drake did some quick calculations. How many are we talking about? At current production levels, Hassan swallowed hard, over 10,000. The implications hung heavy in the stale air. 10,000 genetically engineered killing machines, each one capable of tearing through military-grade armor. If they broke loose, the death toll would be catastrophic, and if Sterling somehow maintained control of them. We need to shut it down, Drake said. All of it, not just escape. We have to stop this before it goes any further. The breeding chambers have redundant security systems, Hassan warned. And Sterling's moved her command center down there to personally oversee production. We'd never get close. Nira had gone quiet, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Yes, we could. The dissonance. It's not just a danger, it's an opportunity. She looked at Drake. The Mordrics are unstable, pushing against their artificial controls. If I could reach the central chamber, amplify my own resonance through their systems. You could break Sterling's control, Hassan finished, eyes widening. Turn her own weapons against her. Or calm them, Nira corrected. Return them to balance, but, she hesitated. The strain of connecting with so many at once through systems designed to corrupt the resonance, I don't know if I would survive it. Drake studied her face, seeing the same quiet determination he'd witnessed in the execution chamber. There has to be another way. Is there? Nira's eyes met his. More of my people disappear every day. The dissonance grows stronger. If we don't act now, how many more will die? Another tremor shook the level, and this time Drake could hear something else beneath it, a distant, discordant keening that set his teeth on edge. The Mordrics were getting harder to control. Hassan's datapad chimed with an alert. Sterling's called an all-hands meeting in 1 hour, something about a demonstration of force. Whatever she's planning, we're running out of time. Drake looked between his companions, the determined healer and the brave scientist who'd risked everything to help them. They had one chance to prevent a catastrophe, but the cost might be higher than he was willing to pay. If we do this, he said carefully, we do it smart. We're not trading your life for a maybe, Nira. We need a plan. She nodded, and together they bent over the facility schematics, searching for a way to defeat Sterling's ambitions without sacrificing everything in the process. Above them, the lights flickered with another power surge, and somewhere in the depths of Nexus 7, 10,000 engineered nightmares strained against their bonds, waiting to be either weapon or salvation. The underground network's hidden sanctuary was carved into an abandoned mineral processing facility 3 levels below the prison's official blueprints. Nikolai Volkov, a former special operations officer turned resistance leader, studied the facility schematics that Hassan had brought while his team of dissidents prepared for what might be their final mission. Sterling's arrogance will be her undoing, Volkov said, his accent thick with the harsh consonants of the outer colonies. She's gathered all her resources in one place, believing her security too strong to breach. Drake watched the rebel leader's scarred fingers trace the path to the breeding chambers. In the 6 hours since their escape from the hydroponics level, he'd learned that the underground network had operatives throughout the prison system. They'd been gathering evidence of Sterling's illegal experiments for months, but hadn't known the full scope until now. The power grid is our weakness, Hassan said, pointing to the facility's energy distribution nodes. Even with the network's help, we can't shut down the breeding chambers without triggering emergency protocols. The Mordrics would be released into the general population. Nira sat cross-legged in a corner of the command center, her eyes closed in meditation. She'd been growing increasingly sensitive to the psychic dissonance emanating from below, and Drake could see the toll it was taking. Her normally iridescent skin would occasionally ripple with waves of dark color, reflecting the chaotic energies she was trying to block out. "What about the other Thanari?" Drake asked. "The one still in Sterling's custody." Volkov's second in command, a silent woman who went by the codename Phantom, brought up surveillance footage on her tablet. "We've confirmed 3 surviving healers in the research wing, but extracting them during the operation would split our forces." "We can't leave them," Nira said without opening her eyes. "The stronger the resonance, the better our chances of success, and I won't abandon my people to Sterling's butchery." Volkov nodded grimly. "Agreed. Phantom, take your best team and free the healers, but timing will be critical. Sterling's demonstration is in 50 minutes. Whatever she's planning, that's our window to act." Hassan pulled up the latest security feeds. "The breeding chambers are already at critical pressure. Look at the containment field readings. The Mordricks are acting as a unified entity now, pushing against their bonds in perfect synchronization. I've never seen anything like it." "They're answering the call," Nira said softly. "Even corrupted, even twisted by Sterling's machines, they remember what they once were, what we once were together." She opened her eyes, and Drake saw ancient knowledge there, mixed with profound sadness. "Before the wars, before we turned to healing, my people were guardians of balance. The Mordricks were our partners, not our weapons. What Sterling's done? It's not just cruel, it's an abomination against nature itself." A young resistance fighter burst into the command center. "Sir, new intelligence from our source in Sterling's personal guard. The demonstration, it's not just for the prison staff. She's invited military observers from 3 border systems." "She's going public," Drake realized, "showing off her weapons to potential buyers." "More than that," Volkov growled. "She's starting a war. Those systems have been in a delicate peace for decades, if one side gets control of the Mordricks." "All-out conflict," Hassan finished. "Exactly what Sterling wants, endless demand for her weapons and a perfect cover to continue her experiments." Drake studied the schematics again, military training kicking in. "We'll need 3 teams, Phantom's group to free the healers, a strike team to breach Sterling's command center and secure her research data, and a path to the central breeding chamber," Nira interrupted. She stood, her movements liquid grace despite her obvious exhaustion. "For me." "Nira," Drake started, but she held up a hand. "I've touched the dissonance, Colonel. I understand now what needs to be done. The chambers aren't just for breeding, they're a massive resonance engine. Sterling built them to amplify and corrupt our abilities, but they can be used to restore balance instead. One pure note to counter the chaos." "At what cost?" Hassan asked quietly. Nira's smile was gentle but determined. "Everything has a price, Doctor. The question is whether it's worth paying." Volkov's people were already gearing up, checking weapons and communication equipment. The rebel leader himself stood before a battered storage locker, removing what looked like old military-grade stealth suits. "4 of these still work," he said. "They'll get you past the first layer of security, but don't rely on them. Sterling's paranoia means redundant scanning systems throughout the facility." Drake checked his own gear, mind racing through tactical scenarios. "How many guards in the command center?" "At least 20 elite troops," Phantom reported. "Plus automated defense systems and Sterling herself. She's former military augmented forces. Don't underestimate her in close combat." "Time check," Hassan called out. 43 minutes to demonstration." The command center burst into focused activity as final preparations were made. While Volkov briefed his team leaders, Drake pulled Nira aside. "Are you sure about this?" She reached up to touch his face, her fingers cool against his skin. "When you jumped into the execution pit to save me, were you sure?" "That was different." "Was it you acted because you knew it was right despite the cost? Now it's my turn." She glanced at the others preparing for battle. "These are good people fighting for what they believe in. Help them, protect them. But when the moment comes, promise me you'll let me do what needs to be done." Before Drake could respond, Volkov called them back to the command center. The rebel leader had a fierce light in his eyes as he addressed the gathered fighters. "Today we end Sterling's reign of terror. Today we restore balance, for freedom, for justice, and for all those who have suffered under her cruelty." He raised his fist. "For the underground." The answering cry shook dust from the ceiling. As the teams moved out through hidden access tunnels, Drake felt the weight of what was to come settling over him. They had one chance to prevent a war, save thousands of lives, and expose Sterling's atrocities. But watching Nira walk ahead of him, her bearing regal despite everything she'd endured, he couldn't shake the feeling that victory would come at a terrible price. No, Sterling slammed her augmented fist into a control panel. Increase power to the containment fields, initiate maximum control stimulation. The Mordrix screamed, a sound that shook the entire facility. But under the pain, under the artificial controls trying to force them into weapons, another sound grew. The creatures began to resonate with the Thanari song, their natural frequencies emerging from beneath Sterling's corruption. "What are you doing?" Sterling raised her weapon, targeting Nira. "Stop this immediately." Drake tackled her before she could fire, and they fought desperately on the platform. Sterling's augmentations made her incredibly strong, but Drake's special operations training kept him in the fight. Around them, the battle for control of the facility raged on. The song grew stronger. Hassan called out from her position at the controls. "The resonance engine, they're revering it. The Mordric's genetic structure is changing." Sterling threw Drake off and staggered to her feet, blood running from her nose. "No, I won't let you destroy everything I've built." She pulled a device from her uniform. "Emergency Protocol Omega, release all specimens." The breeding tanks began to open, but something unexpected happened. The Mordrix emerged not as ravening monsters, but with an eerie grace. Their movements were synchronized not with Sterling's control signals, but with the Thanari song. The creatures formed concentric circles around the platform, swaying in harmony. "Impossible," Sterling whispered. Nira's voice rose to a crystalline pitch that seemed to pierce reality itself. Light poured from her body, using Sterling's resonance engine to amplify and direct the healing frequencies. The Mordrix began to change, their weaponized features softening, their original form emerging from beneath generations of corruption. "They're returning to their original state," Hassan said in awe. "The genetic modifications are being undone." Sterling screamed in rage and raised her weapon one final time. Drake brought her down with a precise shot to her augmented systems, and she collapsed, watching her weapons become instruments of peace. The song reached its crescendo, and Nira's light filled the chamber. When it faded, the Mordrix had transformed. They were still fearsome creatures, but the engineered rage was gone from their bearing. They moved with purpose rather than bloodlust, power tempered by ancient wisdom. But the price was heavy. Nira collapsed, caught by her fellow healers. Drake rushed to her side. "Did we succeed?" she whispered. "Yes," Drake held her hand as Hassan ran medical scans. "The Mordrix are free. Sterling's arrested. It's over." Nira smiled faintly. "Not over. Beginning. They'll need guidance, teaching the old ways." "Save your strength," Drake urged, but she shook her head. It was worth it. Balance restored, her eyes closed. Hassan worked frantically with her medical equipment. "She's stable, but barely. The resonance energy." It nearly burned her out completely. Volkov appeared, his forces having secured the facility. "Medical evacuation is inbound. We've contacted the Thanari High Council. They're sending healers." He looked at the transformed Mordrix with wonder. "What do we do with them?" One of the surviving healers stepped forward. "We return to our original purpose. Guardians, not weapons. It's time to remember who we truly are." Drake held Nira's hand as medical teams arrived. Around them, Mordrix and humans and Thanari moved in a complex dance of cooperation, beginning the long process of healing wounds, both physical and spiritual. Sterling's dream of weapons and war had been transformed into an opportunity for peace. In the end, it wasn't strength or control or military might that had won the day. It was harmony, understanding, the willingness to risk everything to restore balance to a broken world. As the medical ships arrived and the long work of restoration began, Drake looked out over the chamber where weapons had become wonders. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy. It was the courage to heal,